What is going on, everybody? Again, thank you so very much for hanging with your boy. Truly appreciate it. As y'all always know, man, I don't know if you know how much it means because I know that there's so many voices that you could potentially be listening to, especially around matters of faith, around Christianity, around Bible, and to just allow me to be one of those voices. I'm appreciative. Let me start off by saying this also. I have no agenda but to help. And I pray and I can only hope that somewhere along the way, or as we continue, that you will hopefully uh, find and start to experience some type of growth, or begin to experience some type of transformation, or just find whatever we're doing helpful. So I thoroughly appreciate it. Thank you so much. So let's hop right into this. So today, um, wanted to have this whole conversation around specifically about Genesis 32. Genesis 32. So, y'all see, I got this big old Bible. I don't know. I love big Bibles. So, Genesis 32, um, it's a pretty famous passage of scripture. But I find oftentimes going back to passages that you've read before and that you're pretty familiar with in light of life experiences can oftentimes lead to new revelation. And that's kind of sort of what happened with this. And I want to kind of share with you. So Genesis 32, the context and totality, it's a part of Genesis where we're covering the life of Jacob. Jacob is one of what's called the patriarchs of Scripture, especially in the Old Testament. One of the main characters, as you've seen before in Scripture, it talks about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But if you know that ultimately Jacob undergoes a transformation and his name is changed from Jacob to Israel. Now, this is very, 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 very important, especially in scripture, because after this transformation happens, it then changes a lot as a result of his transformation. As a matter of fact, it's seen in his name. It's seen in his name. Jacob means trickster, supplanter, heel grabber. That's how Jacob is maneuvering life. But then God changes his name. And when God changes his name Israel means God is prevailing. God is a winner. You see, so there's a change and a transformation that happens. And that's where we come here. And again, I've read this particular scripture 375 million times. Matter of fact, one of my personal favorite, I know nobody cares, one of my personal favorite sermons that I wrote some time ago is from this passage. And so it begins at Genesis 32, beginning at verse 24. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not defeat him, he struck Jacob's hip socket as they wrestled and dislocated his hip. Then he said to Jacob, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" the man asked. "Jacob," he replied. "Your name will no longer be Jacob," he said. "It will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he answered, "Why do you ask my name?" And he blessed him there. Jacob then named the place Peniel, "For I have seen God face to face." He said, "Yet my life has been spared." The sun shone on him as he passed by Peniel, limping because of his hip. That is why still today the Israelites don't eat the thigh muscle that is at the hip socket, because he struck Jacob's hip socket at the thigh muscle. Interesting text. In summary, this is what happens. Jacob is waiting to meet his brother Esau. When waiting to meet his brother Esau, ultimately he gets into comeback, a fight with at the moment it happens, he's not sure who it is. But with this man, and as they're wrestling, he ultimately discovers that he's wrestling with God. And in the midst of wrestling with God, God touches his hip socket. When God touches the hip socket, ultimately throws his hip out of place, and all he can do is hold on. That's all he can do. And then he says, "Let me go. The day is about to break." And then Jacob responds with an amazing response. Jacob says, "I won't let you go until you bless me." I love it. Every time I read it, I love it. I won't let you go until you bless me. So my brother Trey, Trey's a therapist, and Trey, I thoroughly enjoy my conversations with my brother Trey because Trey seems to be on a walk in his faith journey, especially along the lines of psychology, how to wed both faith and psychology. And I always enjoy that. As a matter of fact, I think that's what we need probably more in the faith. People that not necessarily trying to be in the pulpit or trying to be necessarily in church positions, but are saying, how can I wed faith in whatever I'm doing? Whether that be politics, whether that be a teacher in education or whatever. How can I wed that? And oftentimes we have these conversations, and this one was specifically around Jordan Peterson. Everybody knows who Jordan Peterson is, famed psychologist, took off especially around the time during the COVID time. We know Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson was having a conversation with a man that was talking about doubts. And I'll play the clip here.
With the Deathly Hallows version of, now I'm going to give you the mythology, and I'm going to tell you exactly what you wrestle with to learn what spirit not only lives inside you currently, what spirit should live inside of you. All of the human experience has already been thought through. I can't give it to you in a bunch of simple packages of the rules for life because those will become dead wood fast. I've got to get you into the thing. There's a reason you titled this book, We Who Wrestle with God, and not What You Can Learn from God. That would have been a title more people would have understood. But there's obviously something to this idea of wrestling with living ideas, making it personal, figuring out what your relationship is with this stuff.
When Jacob is wrestling with God, that's worship. That's true worship. That's why he's awarded the name Israel. He's the leader of the chosen people because he wrestles with God. So that's manna for the suffering, because it means that if you're genuinely suffering, then God's there.
Notice how he describes these things. It's talking about wrestling with doubts. And then amongst these wrestling with doubts, you see that Jordan Peterson equates wrestling to worship. I thought that was so crazy. He's like, that's what it is. It's worship. That's what wrestling is. And here it is. We are in the week. This weekend, WrestleMania is going to go down. And I'm so excited because The Rock, the final boss, is back. But in this interesting, because wrestling is such an interesting phenomenon, right? Because you and I can't wrestle unless there's physical contact, right? I can't wrestle from a distance. I can't wrestle if you're not in close quarters with me. That to wrestle means that there has to be close contact. And so we were having this particular conversation in light of another conversation that we were having around Kanye West.
Are you in that space where you're comfortable enough to say, this is where I am right now? I'm still a man of God. Jesus still is king, but this is vultures right now. This is where I am.
It is, but I have my issues with Jesus. There's a lot of stuff I went through that I prayed and I ain't see Jesus show.
Because Kanye was being interviewed by Big Boy, and Kanye admitted to the fact that he had problems with Jesus because some things didn't go the way that he thought. And I wish I could have talked to Kanye because I love that. I love the fact when somebody can openly admit that, hey, I have a problem here. I have a problem with God here. I don't agree with God here. I disagree with how this went down. As a matter of fact, we see that throughout Scripture. In John chapter 11, that's the problem with the account with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. So much so that Martha goes and says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That's the issue. The issue is that Jesus did not make things happen the way that I thought that it should have happened. So here it is. We have Kanye on one hand. Kanye is expressing this reality. I got problems with Jesus. And then Jordan Peterson seemingly saying, hey, there is something to worship and wrestling, or wrestling and worship. And that's what I kind of want to talk about a little bit today. I know that was a long runway, but stay with me. Wrestling in worship. When we think about those realities, because I think that both of them are true to some regard, that number one, there are three things I want you to take away from this. Number one, as I stated earlier, you cannot wrestle unless there's direct contact. My brother, Trey, the one I was having this conversation with, Trey was a wrestler in high school. And I would watch him that for 3 rounds, for 2 minutes apiece, he would wrestle these different individuals, and it would take everything. He would train for weeks upon weeks, have to make weight and everything. It was exhausting to have to train for these fights. And they were only 6 minutes in total. But to fight and to wrestle, it takes a lot out of you. But you also have to do this in close quarters, in close combat. In other words, what if the points and times of your life that you potentially want to express some type of problem with God, maybe that is God offering an invitation to you to wrestle with him. Maybe the points of your life that you seemingly have an issue with God, maybe those are the points and the times that God is saying, yes, let's enter into this wrestling match. I think that's where it is. So yeah, Kanye, it's okay, bro. It's okay to express a problem with Jesus. And Jesus is saying, let's wrestle with this. Most of the time, faith is not about getting the right answer. Faith is about asking the right questions. Let me give it to you one more time. Faith most times isn't about getting the right answer. It is about asking the right question and seeing what comes as a result of asking the right question. See, multiple times in our lives, we go through these experiences, and then we think that we're only trying to get to a certain point or a certain destination. And God is just saying, hey, no, just come and walk alongside me. That's what real faith is. So that's the first thing, right? The first thing is that allow the rest, understand that sometimes wrestling is an invitation from God to come closer, to come into direct contact. Secondly, this is also something that I think is very, very important from the scriptures and from both of these characters of Kanye and Jordan Peterson, that I think that you kind of see some synergy between the three of them. Notice what happens. The story is Jacob is wrestling with God. Jacob is wrestling with God. Now, the question is, oh my God, Jacob is so strong and to be wrestling with God. Yeah, but to some degree, you kind of got to push back against it, because what happens? He touches his hip socket and throws his hip out. Just a touch, and his hip goes out of place. So when he touches his hip socket, hip goes out of place. And then ultimately, what do we see? We see Jacob holding on. That's all he can do. He can only hold on at this particular moment. And God says, let me go, because the day is about to break. Let me go. And Jacob says, I won't let you go until you bless me. This raises a very important question. In wrestling with God, in our wrestling encounters with God, how do you and I say what a win is? How do we know who is victorious at the end of the wrestling match? So the text seems to suggest a number of different ways, right? Either winning is losing, or winning is holding on. Does Jacob win this match? Because again, his name is changed from Jacob, supplanter, to now that being of that of Israel. God is prevailing. God is a winner, right? How? If he loses? Or is him losing really him winning? See, he loses because he ultimately can't fight anymore. He can only hold on. He touches the hip socket. He loses his ability. He loses the ability to move his hip. He can't wrestle with a bad hip. So either winning is losing, or does Jacob win because Jacob only holds on? That's the only thing he can do. His name is changed to that of God being a winner because he holds on. Maybe that's how we win. Maybe that's how we win in life's, in our wrestling matches with God. Because you and I have engaged in a battle, and then in the midst of engaging in that battle, all we can do is hold on. I don't know. I think there are a number of different ways you can look at it. To be honest, I really think both answers at certain parts of our lives are true. That sometimes winning is losing, right? So, and then if I think you'll get to a point in your walk with God where you will willingly lose, if that makes sense. Okay. So sometimes winning is losing. Then sometimes winning is just holding on. Or this is what I think the text is really trying to say. Sometimes the entire encounter is a win. Just the fact that you're wrestling is a win. See, we grew up, a lot of us grew up in church, and some of us in our faith walks have had times where we've expressed doubts, have had times where we struggled or whatever. And I'm saying God welcomes the struggle. God welcomes the wrestle. God welcomes it. That God isn't afraid of your skepticism. God isn't afraid of your anger, your frustration, and your doubts. God is willing to wrestle with you. That's the beauty of faith. That's the beauty of the God that we serve. The fact that God is willing to wrestle. And I'm only trying to suggest that the ability to wrestle, that God's willingness to wrestle, when met with your willingness to wrestle, brings about a transformation that you otherwise would not have experienced. If you're doubting God, wrestle with God. If you're skeptical about God, wrestle with God. If you've got some questions about how some things turned out and you're not happy about it, wrestle with God. Because somewhere along the way, the struggle, the straining, and the wrestling, I believe brings about a transformation that ultimately you would not have experienced. That's all I want to share with y'all today. I pray today that you will engage with God, that you would wrestle with God, that you would go after God, because that's where the real win is. Jacob never becomes Israel. Jacob never has his name changed if he doesn't engage in the wrestle. So yeah, man, thank you all so much for viewing this little small video. I pray that you found it to be helpful. As I always say, live in purpose, on purpose. Make sure you subscribe to my channel. I can't wait until next week to lock in with y'all again. And some of y'all criticized me last time for my desk, man. I be busy. I got a lot of stuff going on. And I see y'all next week. And I don't know, I may crack out some more of this, a little bit more, some more lessons or some more thoughts. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear back from you. Let me know if this was helpful. I love y'all. Peace.